The silence of Dr. Morrison's dental practice after hours was a specific kind of quiet. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library or the heavy hush of a church. It was a sterile, waiting silence, humming with the low thrum of the beverage fridge in the staff room and the faint, electrical buzz of the server rack in the back office. It smelled of mint and antiseptic, a clean, sharp scent that clung to my clothes and lived in my sinuses long after I'd clocked out. For 3 nights a week, from 10 in the evening until 2 in the morning, this silent, sterile world was mine. My job was simple: to erase the day. I wiped away the smudges of anxious fingers on the waiting room glass, vacuumed the ghosts of footsteps from the plush carpeting, and polished the gleaming chrome of the examination chairs until they reflected my own tired face back at me. I was a ghost myself, in a way, moving through the empty spaces where lives intersected for brief, painful moments. I saw the aftermath of it all. The crumpled tissues in the wastebaskets, the faint, salty tracks of tears on the leather of the patient chairs, the nervous sweat marks on the armrests. I knew things about these people they never imagined a cleaner would see. I knew who chewed their nails to the quick, who bled from flossing too hard, who had a secret candy habit they denied to the hygienist. I saw it all in the detritus they left behind, and I cleaned it away, resetting the stage for the next day's drama. It was anonymous work, lonely work, but it was steady. And right now, steady was everything. My life had been pared down to the studs. Apartment, bills, this job, and the crushing weight of a debt I was slowly, painstakingly chipping away at. There was no room for anything else. No time for friends. No money for hobbies. No energy for hope. I existed in the quiet hours, in the clean, empty spaces, and that was enough. Or so I told myself. But sometimes, in the dead of night, with the scent of bleach sharp in the air, a profound loneliness would settle over me, as heavy and as cold as the lead apron they used for x-rays. It was in those moments that I found myself lingering over the patient files left on the reception desk for morning check-in. It was a small, forbidden thing, a tiny rebellion against the anonymity. I'd run my gloved finger over the names on the tabs, imagining the faces, the lives. And then there was his file. Blackwood, Arthur. The name itself felt solid, like old money and mahogany desks. I knew who he was, of course. Anyone in this city who read the business section knew the name Blackwood. He was a titan of industry, a philanthropist, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and envy. His file was thicker than the others, filled with complex charts for implants and cosmetic work that cost more than my car, more than I made in a year. He was a regular, yet our paths had never crossed. He came during the day, during the hours of the living. I came at night. I'd found something of his once, tucked down the side of the chair in Operatory 3. A single, plain silver cufflink. It wasn't flashy, but the weight of it in my palm felt significant. It was cool and smooth, perfectly machined, a small object of immense quality. I should have turned it in, left it on the counter for the receptionist to find. But I didn't. I slipped it into my pocket. It felt like holding a secret, a tangible piece of a world so far removed from my own it might as well have been another planet. Sometimes, on my break, I'd take it out and roll it between my thumb and forefinger, the metal warming to my touch. It was a foolish, sentimental thing, a connection to a man who had no idea I existed. Tonight was no different. I was halfway through my routine, mopping the floor of the main hallway, the rhythmic slosh of the water in the bucket the only sound. The antiseptic smell was particularly strong, a sign that someone had a difficult procedure. I was lost in the mindless repetition of the task, my mind blessedly blank, when a sound ripped through the silence. The distinct, metallic click of a key in the front door lock. My entire body went rigid. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. No one was supposed to be here. Dr. Morrison was in Hawaii, a fact I knew from the cheerful postcard taped to the staff room fridge. The hygienists were long gone. It could be a break-in. My mind raced, cataloging the nearest heavy object, the fire extinguisher mounted by the door. I tightened my grip on the mop handle, my knuckles white, and held my breath, listening. The lock turned, the bolt slid back with a heavy thud, and the door swung inward. A man stood silhouetted against the hazy glow of the streetlights. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark overcoat that hung perfectly from his frame. He paused in the doorway, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of the clinic, and for a second, we just stared at each other down the long, polished hallway. My fear began to recede, replaced by a jolt of recognition so sharp it was almost painful. It was him, Arthur Blackwood. He looked different in person than in the crisp, professionally lit photos I'd seen online. Older, certainly, with fine lines etched around his eyes and threads of silver at his temples. But it was more than that. He looked tired. Deeply, fundamentally tired. The kind of tired that had settled into his bones. He carried himself with an undeniable air of authority, but tonight, it was layered with a visible weariness that made him seem more human, more approachable, than the billionaire in the news. He finally moved, stepping inside and closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the silence. His gaze swept over me, taking in my worn jeans, my company-issued polo shirt, the mop in my hands. There was no judgment in his expression, just a quiet assessment. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was deeper than I'd imagined, a low, calm baritone that seemed to absorb the tension in the air. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Arthur Blackwood. I'm a patient here." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "I know who you are, Mr. Blackwood." My own voice sounded thin, reedy. I lowered the mop, feeling foolish for having held it like a weapon. "I'm Leo. I'm with the cleaning service." He gave a slight nod, his eyes still on me. They were a dark, indeterminate color in the low light, but they were incredibly perceptive. I felt as though he could see right through my carefully constructed walls, down to the anxious, lonely person huddled inside. "Leo," he repeated, tasting the name. "I see. I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "No, sir. Not at all." The formality felt strange, but necessary. He was a client. I was the help. Those were the lines, and they were drawn in permanent ink. "Is there something I can help you with?" "The office is closed." A faint, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the stern lines. "I'm aware. I'm afraid I've been an idiot. I left my briefcase in one of the treatment rooms this afternoon. It has my entire life in it. I was hoping to retrieve it before my flight in the morning, of course," I said, my professionalism kicking in. It was a relief to have a task, a role to play. "Which room was it?" "Operatory 3, I believe, the room where I'd found the cufflink." A strange coincidence that sent a nervous flutter through my stomach. "Right this way." I led him down the hallway, the soft soles of my work shoes squeaking faintly on the damp floor, a stark contrast to the solid, confident sound of his leather dress shoes. The air felt charged, thick with his presence. He had a scent, something subtle and clean, like cedar and expensive soap. It was a world away from the chemical smell of my cleaning supplies. I pushed open the door to Operatory 3. The room was dark, the large window overlooking the city street casting long shadows across the empty dental chair. And there, on the small counter beside the chair, was a sleek, dark leather briefcase. He let out a quiet sigh of relief. "There it is," he said, his voice laced with gratitude. "Thank you. You've saved me a considerable headache." He walked past me into the room, his arm brushing against mine as he did. The contact was brief, accidental, but a jolt of warmth shot through me, a startling, unexpected current. I instinctively pulled back, my heart giving another one of those painful thumps. He picked up the briefcase, his long fingers curling around the handle. He turned back to face me, and we stood there for a moment in the dimly lit room, surrounded by the inert machinery of dentistry. The silence stretched, no longer sterile, but filled with an unspoken awareness. He wasn't just a name in a file anymore. He was here, a solid, breathing presence in my solitary world. His eyes scanned my face, and his expression shifted, the faint smile fading into something more contemplative. "You look exhausted," he said, his voice soft. It wasn't an accusation, just a simple statement of fact. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. I was used to being invisible. To be seen so clearly, so suddenly, felt like being caught without my skin on. "It's late," I mumbled, looking down at my shoes. "It is," he agreed. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching me. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." I didn't know what to say to that. It was true. I felt the weight of it every single day. The debt, the loneliness, the future that felt like a long, empty hallway. His perception was unsettling, unnervingly accurate. I finally risked a glance up at him. The weariness was back in his eyes, a familiar shadow. Maybe he knew what that weight felt like, too. He offered another small, sad smile. "Smile for me," he said, the words quiet, almost a request. Just for a second. "It helps." The words hung in the air between us. It wasn't a command, not a demand from a rich man to a service worker. It was stranger than that. It was an invitation, a shared acknowledgement of the burdens we carried. It was a plea from one tired soul to another. He wasn't asking for a performance. He was asking for a moment of connection, a flicker of light in the darkness. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. A real smile felt impossible, a language I'd forgotten how to speak. But I managed something, a small, tired lift of my lips. It felt brittle, fragile, like it might break my face. But it was honest. In return, he gave me a genuine smile of his own. It was a slow, beautiful thing that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners and erasing some of the exhaustion from his face. For a brief, startling moment, he looked 10 years younger. "There," he said softly. "Thank you, Leo." He held my gaze for a heartbeat longer, a silent communication passing between us that I couldn't begin to decipher. Then he nodded once, a gesture of finality, and turned to leave. I watched him walk down the hall, his silhouette framed by the doorway before he stepped out into the night, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone once more in the humming, antiseptic silence. But it was different now. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of his voice, the memory of his smile, and the startling, unfamiliar warmth of being seen. The following week, the encounter with Arthur Blackwood felt like a dream. I went back to my routine, to the familiar solitude of the late-night shift. I polished and scrubbed and mopped, trying to push the memory of his tired eyes and quiet voice to the back of my mind. It was a dangerous thing to dwell on, a brief intersection of two worlds that were never meant to overlap. He was a billionaire with a flight to catch, and I was the man who cleaned his dentist's office. That was the beginning and the end of our story. And yet, his presence lingered. I found myself cleaning Operatory 3 with extra care, my eyes drifting to the spot on the counter where his briefcase had been. The air in the room seemed to hold a residual charge, a faint memory of his cedar and soap scent. I took the silver cufflink from my pocket more often, the cool metal a solid reminder that he was real, that our strange, quiet conversation in the dark had actually happened. It was a foolish obsession, and I knew it. But in the stark landscape of my life, it was a single point of warmth, and I couldn't help but turn toward it. Then, 2 weeks after his late-night visit, something changed. I arrived for my shift to find a note on the reception desk, tucked under the keyboard. It was on thick, cream-colored cardstock, folded in half, with my name, Leo, written on the front in a strong, elegant script. My heart did a nervous little flip. Cleaners don't get notes on expensive stationery. I picked it up, my gloved fingers fumbling slightly. Inside, the message was brief and to the point. "Mr. Blackwood has an emergency appointment at 10:30 tonight. Please be advised he will be here during the first part of your shift. Thank you, Sarah." Reception. An emergency appointment. At 10:30 at night. My mind spun. Dr. Morrison was still in Hawaii. Who would be seeing him? And why so late? It made no sense. A man like Arthur Blackwood could have any dentist in the city open their doors for him at any time. Why come here, after hours, when only the cleaning crew was present? A wave of anxiety washed over me. I would have to work around him. I would have to be present, visible, while he was here. Our last encounter had been buffered by the strangeness of the hour and the surprise of his arrival. This felt different. This was scheduled. It felt intentional. But that was a ridiculous thought. I was letting my imagination run away with me. It was just a toothache, a cracked crown, a coincidence. Nothing more. I tried to go about my work as usual, but my focus was shot. I kept glancing at the clock, the slow sweep of the second hand marking the time until his arrival. I started in the back offices, hoping to be finished with the common areas before he got there, wanting to minimize our interaction. But the minutes ticked by too quickly. At exactly 10:30, I heard the sound of the front door opening again. This time, I was prepared. He wasn't alone. A younger, harried-looking dentist I'd never seen before was with him, carrying a medical bag. The dentist, a Dr. Evans according to his name tag, nodded curtly at me before rushing toward the operatories. But Arthur Blackwood paused. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. He was dressed more casually tonight, in a dark sweater and trousers, but he still radiated the same quiet authority. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Good to see you again, Mr. Blackwood." I replied, my voice steadier this time. "I hope everything is all right." A flicker of something, annoyance, pain, crossed his face. "A cracked molar," he said, his jaw tight. Apparently my teeth are not as resilient as my portfolio. There was a hint of dry humor in his tone, but his eyes told a different story. He was in pain. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "I'll try to stay out of your way." "Don't," he said, the word sharper than he intended. He seemed to catch himself, and his voice softened. "Please, don't. Just go about your work." The sound is a welcome distraction, and so began the strangest hour of my working life. I cleaned the waiting room and the reception area while the sounds of a dental drill whined from down the hall. I tried to be as quiet as possible, but he was right. In the tense silence between the drilling, the normal sounds of my work, the swish of a cloth, the click of a spray bottle, were grounding. I was acutely aware of him, just 2 doors away. I could feel his presence like a low-frequency hum. After what felt like an eternity, the drilling stopped. A few minutes later, Dr. Evans emerged, looking relieved. He gave me another brief nod and saw himself out, leaving me alone in the clinic once more with Arthur Blackwood. I hesitated, unsure of the protocol. Should I continue my work? Should I wait for him to leave? I decided to start on the staff break room, giving him space. I was wiping down the counters when he appeared in the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, one hand pressed to his jaw. The left side of his mouth was slightly swollen, and he looked even more tired than before. "Is it better?" I asked softly. He nodded, wincing slightly. "The wonders of modern anesthetics," he murmured. His speech was a little slurred from the numbing agent. "It feels like I have a cotton ball for a cheek." I couldn't help but smile a little. "I know the feeling." He watched me for a moment as I finished wiping the counter. My movements felt clumsy and self-conscious under his gaze. I was just the cleaner, a man paid to be invisible. Yet he looked at me with an intensity that made me feel anything but. "You're very methodical," he observed. "Thorough, it's the job," I said with a shrug. "Some people do the job, and some people do it well," he countered. "There's a difference." He pushed himself off the doorframe and walked slowly into the room. He moved to the small table in the center and sat down, his large frame making the flimsy chair look like a child's toy. He looked out of place, a hawk perched on a canary's swing. I finished with the counters and turned to the floors, unsure what else to do. I filled my bucket, the sound of the running water unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He just sat there, watching me, his long legs stretched out in front of him. The silence was thick with questions I was too afraid to ask. "Why here?" I finally said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Why so late?" He looked at me, his dark eyes seeming to search my face for something. "Dr. Evans is a specialist. He owed me a favor," he said simply. "And I prefer privacy." The way he said the word privacy made it clear he wasn't just talking about his dental records. He was talking about this, the quiet, the emptiness, the ability to just be, without the constant observation that must come with his level of fame and wealth. Here, in this sterile, after-hours world, he wasn't a titan of industry. He was just a man with a toothache. And I was just a man with a mop. For some reason, that felt like a level playing field. I started mopping the floor, working my way from the far corner toward the door, leaving him an island of dry tile around the table. He didn't seem inclined to leave. He just sat, one hand still cradling his jaw, his gaze following my movements. It should have been unnerving, being watched so intently while performing such a menial task. But it wasn't. There was a strange comfort in it. It felt like he was guarding the space, sharing the solitude with me. When I was done, I leaned the mop against the wall to dry. There was nothing left to do in this room. I looked at him, and he looked back at me. "You have very kind eyes," he said suddenly, his voice low and slightly thick from the anesthetic. The compliment landed in the center of my chest like a warm stone. No one had ever said that to me before. I had no idea how to respond. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a slow nod, his gaze dropping to my hands. "What did you do?" he asked, "before this?" The question caught me off guard. It implied that this, my current life, was a temporary state, a stopgap. It implied that I was meant for something else. It was a question full of assumptions, but it was also full of genuine curiosity. I was a student, I said, the words tasting like rust in my mouth. Art history. A long time ago, it felt like another lifetime, another person. A person who had dreams, who believed in things like beauty and tenure. A person who hadn't been crushed by the weight of his family's medical debt. Art history. He repeated, a flicker of interest in his eyes. That's a world away from this. He gestured vaguely at the room, at my cleaning cart. Tell me about it, I said with a humorless laugh. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me again. I own a gallery downtown, he said. The Blackwood Gallery on Mercer. Perhaps you've heard of it. I had. It was one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in the country. I used to go there on weekends, back when I had weekends, back when I had the $1.50 for the bus fare. I would wander through the quiet, white-walled rooms, feeling both inspired and hopelessly inadequate. I've been, I said quietly. Another one of his small, rare smiles appeared. Good. We have a new installation coming in next month. A retrospective on Eleanor Vance. Her early sketches are remarkable. He spoke about it with a passion that animated his tired features, a genuine love for the subject. For a moment, I wasn't talking to a billionaire. I was talking to a fellow art lover. Then, as if remembering himself, the passion receded, replaced by his usual quiet reserve. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements slow and careful. I should let you get back to your work, he said. I'm almost done. I found myself saying, not wanting him to go. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. Well, in that case, he reached into his trouser pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. I stiffened, my stomach twisting into a knot. He was going to tip me. He was going to reduce this strange, fragile connection back to a simple transaction. Employer and employee, rich and poor. But he didn't pull out any money. Instead, he extracted a business card. He held it out to me. My personal cell number is on the back, he said. If you ever find yourself with a free afternoon and a desire to see some remarkable sketches, give me a call. I'd be happy to show you around myself. I stared at the card, at the embossed black lettering of his name. It felt heavier than a simple piece of cardstock. It felt like a key, an invitation to a world I had no right to enter. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out and took it from him. Our fingers brushed. This time, the touch was deliberate. A warm, firm pressure that sent a shockwave up my arm. His skin was dry and warm. The contact lasted only a second, but it felt like a lifetime. I looked up from the card and met his eyes. They were dark and serious, and they held a question he wasn't asking out loud. I didn't know what the answer was. I didn't even fully understand the question. Thank you, I said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. He simply nodded, then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall until the front door clicked shut, leaving me once again in the silence. I stood there for a long time, the business card clutched in my hand, the ghost of his touch still tingling on my fingertips. The silence was different again. It was no longer filled with an echo. It was filled with a possibility, a terrifying, exhilarating, impossible possibility. The next few weeks were a quiet torment. Arthur Blackwood's business card lived in my wallet, a constant, heavy presence against my hip. I took it out a dozen times a day, tracing the raised lettering of his name, staring at the phone number scrawled on the back in his confident hand. It felt like holding a live wire. The potential for a connection was there, humming just beneath the surface, but I was terrified of what would happen if I actually completed the circuit. What would I even say? Hi, Mr. Blackwood. It's Leo, the guy who mops the floors. I'd love to take you up on that offer to see the art you own. The gap between our worlds seemed like a chasm too wide to cross. Every time I thought about calling, a chorus of doubts sang in my head. He was just being polite. He felt sorry for me. It was a rich man's careless gesture of charity, meaningless to him but earth-shattering to me. To call would be to make a fool of myself, to reveal the pathetic depth of my yearning. So I did nothing. I continued my work, my life, my slow march towards solvency. But the silence of the dental office was no longer a comfort. It was a breeding ground for my overactive imagination. I replayed our two brief conversations endlessly, dissecting every word, every glance, every pause. I analyzed the soft tone of his voice when he said I had kind eyes, the warmth in his fingers when they brushed against mine. I was building a fantasy on a foundation of almost nothing, and I knew it was a dangerous game. He didn't come back to the clinic. His name didn't appear on the schedule. The thick file vanished from the reception desk. It was as if he had been a phantom, a figment of my lonely imagination. The only proof I had of his existence was the silver cufflink in my pocket and the business card in my wallet. One night, as I was emptying the trash in Operatory 3, my hand brushed against the side of the patient chair. The leather was cool and smooth. I stopped, my hand resting on the spot where his arm would have been. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure his presence, the scent of cedar, the low rumble of his voice. A wave of longing so intense it made me dizzy washed over me. It was more than just a crush on a handsome, wealthy man. It was a deeper, more fundamental yearning. It was the desire to be seen, to be recognized as something more than just the cleaner, to connect with someone who seemed to understand the weight I carried without me having to say a word. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the chair, lost in thought. The hum of the equipment was the only sound. And in that moment, I realized that the fear of making a fool of myself was nothing compared to the bleak, gray certainty of my life if I did nothing. The worst he could do was say no, or not answer, or be politely dismissive. And if he did, I would be no worse off than I was right now. But if I didn't try, I would always wonder. The regret would be a heavier weight than the debt I already carried. My hand is shaking as I pull my phone from my pocket. My fingers feel clumsy, too big for the small screen. I tap in the numbers from the card, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I press the call button before I can lose my nerve. It rings. Once. Twice. Each ring is a lifetime. I'm about to hang up, to retreat back into my safe, silent world, when the ringing stops. Blackwood, his voice is crisp, professional. He doesn't know who's calling. Of course he doesn't. My own voice is a dry croak. Mr. Blackwood? It's Leo. There is a pause. A beat of silence that stretches for an eternity. I can hear the faint sound of traffic in the background on his end. He's somewhere else, in his world. I'm here, in mine, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic. I've made a terrible mistake. Then he says my name. Leo. The professionalism is gone from his voice, replaced by something else. Surprise? Relief? I can't tell. But he says my name like he knows it, like he's been waiting to hear it. I'm glad you called. The relief that floods through me is so powerful it makes my knees weak. I have to lean against the dental chair for support. You are? Yes, he says, his voice warm and certain. I was beginning to think I'd been too forward. A small laugh escapes me, shaky and breathless. No, not at all. I was afraid of being too forward myself. Never, he says softly. So tell me, Leo, do you have a free afternoon anytime soon? Eleanor Vance's sketches are even more remarkable than I remembered. And just like that, the chasm between our worlds doesn't seem so wide after all. It feels like he's just extended a bridge, solid and steady, right to my feet. All I have to do is take the first step. I'm standing on the polished concrete floor of the Blackwood Gallery, and I feel like an imposter. The space is vast and white, with ceilings so high they seem to disappear into the sky. The air is still and cool, carrying the faint, pleasant scent of old paper and oil paint. The silence here is different from the silence at the clinic. It's a reverent silence, a silence that invites contemplation. On the walls around me hang the early sketches of Eleanor Vance, charcoal and pencil studies so full of life and movement they seem to breathe. I'm wearing my only pair of decent pants and a button-down shirt that's a little too tight in the shoulders. I feel out of place among the other patrons, who all look like they were born in art galleries. They drift from piece to piece with an air of casual ownership, speaking in low, confident tones about composition and line weight. I just stand in the center of the room, my hands shoved in my pockets, feeling very small and very much like the man who cleans for a living. Then I see him. He's standing across the gallery, talking to a curator. He's wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit, and he looks every bit the powerful, confident man I've seen in photographs. He belongs here. This is his world. My stomach twists with a fresh wave of anxiety. What am I doing here? As if he senses my presence, he turns his head and his eyes find mine across the crowded room. A slow smile spreads across his face, the same genuine, eye-crinkling smile he gave me in the dark of the dental office. He says a quiet word to the curator and then starts walking toward me. With every step he takes, the vast, intimidating space seems to shrink until it's just the two of us. Leo, he says, his voice a warm, low anchor in the echoing room. You You invited me. I reply, my own voice sounding steadier than I feel. I did, he says, his smile widening. I'm glad you accepted. He looks me over, his gaze appreciative. You clean up nicely. I feel a blush creep up my neck. You're not so bad yourself, Mr. Blackwood. Arthur, he corrects me gently. In here, I'm Arthur. The name feels strange on my tongue, too familiar. But I nod. Arthur, he gestures to the sketches on the wall. So what do you think? As a man of art history, the gentle teasing in his voice puts me at ease. I turn my attention to the art, and for the first time since I walked in, I feel a flicker of my old self, the student who loved this world more than anything. I say, my voice gaining confidence as I speak about something I know, that her use of negative space is incredible. She's not just drawing the figure, she's drawing the air around it. It gives the pieces a sense of weight, of presence. He listens intently, his head tilted slightly, his eyes never leaving my face. He's not just hearing the words, he's listening to me. When I finish, he nods slowly. That's exactly it, he says, a note of wonder in his voice. The air around it. I've been looking at these for a week, and I never thought of it that way. He places a hand lightly on the small of my back, a gesture that is both proprietary and gentle. Come, he says. There's one in the next room I think you'll appreciate. The warmth of his hand seeps through the thin fabric of my shirt, a steady, grounding pressure. It feels natural, right? As he guides me through the gallery, the other patrons seem to melt away. The intimidating space becomes our own private world. He shows me his favorite pieces, and I tell him what I see in them. We talk about art, about history, about the way a single brushstroke can convey a world of emotion. We are not a billionaire and a cleaner. We are two people who share a passion, two people who see the world in a similar way. For the first time in years, I feel like myself. The person I was before my life was derailed, before I became a ghost in the quiet hours. Arthur has not just invited me into his gallery, he has invited me back into my own skin. After we've seen all the sketches, he leads me to a small, private office at the back of the gallery. It's a beautiful room, lined with books, with a large window overlooking a quiet garden. He pours us both a glass of water, and we sit in two comfortable leather armchairs. So, he says, his voice soft, tell me about the art history student, and so I do. I tell him everything. I tell him about my dreams of being a museum curator, about the thesis I was writing on Renaissance portraiture. And then I tell him about my father's illness, about the mountain of medical bills that swallowed my family's savings, my inheritance, my future. I tell him about dropping out of school, about taking any job I could find to stay afloat, about the shame and the exhaustion and the slow, grinding process of giving up on my dreams. I don't mean to tell him so much, but he is such a good listener, his quiet attention a safe harbor for all the things I've kept locked away for so long. When I'm finished, my throat is tight with unshed tears. I stare down at my hands, embarrassed by my own vulnerability. He is silent for a long moment. Then he reaches out and covers my hand with his. His hand is large and warm, and it completely envelopes mine. It's not a gesture of pity. It's a gesture of solidarity, of understanding. You are a man of great strength, Leo, he says, his voice thick with an emotion I can't name. To carry all of that, and still have kind eyes, that is a rare thing. I look up at him, and I see it then. The same weariness I saw in his eyes that first night in the clinic. The same shadow of a burden carried alone. I realize that he, too, knows what it is to be lonely, to be isolated, despite all his wealth and power. In this quiet, beautiful room, surrounded by art and books, the last of the walls between us crumbles away. I see him, and he sees me, and it is a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly wonderful feeling. He doesn't let go of my hand, and I don't pull away. We just sit there, in the quiet afternoon, holding on, two solitary ships that have finally found the same port in a storm. A few days after our visit to the gallery, my world tilted on its axis. I was leaving my apartment for my shift when I found the notice taped to my door. It was a stark, official-looking document. The words, "Final Notice of Eviction," printed in bold, unforgiving letters at the top. My landlord, a man I'd never met who was represented by a faceless property management company, had sold the building. The new owners were converting the units to luxury condos, and my lease, which had been month to month for the past year, was terminated. I had 30 days to vacate. I stood in the dingy hallway of my building, the notice trembling in my hand, and felt the floor drop out from under me. 30 days. It might as well have been 30 minutes. I was living paycheck to paycheck, my savings account a cruel joke. The cost of a security deposit and first month's rent on a new apartment in this city was a mountain I had no way to climb. For the first time, the precariousness of my existence wasn't just a low-level anxiety humming in the background. It was a screaming, immediate threat. I was going to be homeless. I went to work that night in a daze. The familiar, sterile smell of the clinic offered no comfort. The quiet hum of the equipment sounded like a threat. I moved through my tasks like an automaton, my mind a maelstrom of panic and despair. How could I have been so stupid? So short-sighted? I had been so focused on chipping away at my old debt that I hadn't built any kind of safety net. I didn't call Arthur. The thought of it filled me with a profound, gut-wrenching shame. Our connection was so new, so fragile. To bring this mess, this poverty, this failure into it felt like a betrayal. I didn't want to be a project for him, a charity case. I wanted to be his equal, the man who could talk to him about art, not the man who needed his help to keep a roof over his head. But Arthur was a perceptive man. The next time we spoke on the phone, a few days later, he must have heard the strain in my voice. I tried to sound normal, to talk about the weather, about a book I was reading. But my voice was thin, my laughter forced. "Leo," he said, his voice cutting through my pretense. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I lied. "I'm just tired." "Don't," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Don't lie to me. I can hear it in your voice. Something has happened." And just like that, the dam broke. The words came pouring out, a torrent of fear and shame and hopelessness. I told him about the eviction notice, about my lack of savings, about the crushing certainty that I was about to lose everything. I cried, for the first time in years, the silent, shuddering sobs of a man who has been strong for too long. He listened patiently, without interruption. He didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. He just let me pour it all out, his quiet presence on the other end of the line a steady anchor in my storm. When I was finished, my voice hoarse and my cheeks wet, there was a long silence. Then he said, "I have a proposition for you, and I want you to listen to the entire thing before you say no." My heart sank. This was it. The offer of a handout. The moment our fragile equality would be shattered forever. "I have a guest house on my property," he began, his voice calm and measured. "It's small, just a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small living area. It's been empty for years. I also have a personal library, thousands of books, that is in a state of complete and utter chaos. It's been on my to-do list to catalog and organize it for a decade, but I've never had the time. I need someone with a deep knowledge of history and literature. Someone methodical and trustworthy. Someone like you." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I want to offer you a job, Leo. A short-term contract. Organize my library. In exchange, you can live in the guest house, rent-free, for as long as it takes. We'll draw up a formal contract. You'll be paid a fair wage for your work, above and beyond the accommodation. It's a real job, with real expectations. It's not charity. It's a business transaction. And when you're back on your feet, you'll be free to go, no strings attached." I was speechless. My mind was reeling, trying to process the offer. It was a lifeline, a parachute, an escape hatch. It was everything I needed. But it was also terrifying. To live on his property, to be in his debt, to see him every day, it would change everything between us. "Arthur," I whispered. "I can't." "Why not?" he asked, his voice still calm. "Is the work beneath you?" "No, of course not. It's too much. It's you. It would complicate things. It will only complicate things if we let it," he said firmly. "I am offering you a job, Leo, as your potential employer. I am making it very clear that this is a professional arrangement. Your personal life and our friendship will remain separate. You will have your own space, your own key. You will have complete privacy. I give you my word. The choice, as always, is yours. But I hope you'll consider it." We talked for another hour. He answered all of my questions, addressed all of my fears. He was patient and practical, never once making me feel small or needy. He laid out the terms with the cool precision of a businessman, but underneath it all, I could hear the warmth, the care, the genuine desire to help. He wasn't saving me. He was offering me a tool, a stepping stone, so I could save myself. He was giving me an opportunity to use my mind, my skills, the parts of me I thought I had lost forever. He was giving me back a piece of my old self. By the end of the call, my tears had dried, and the panic in my chest had been replaced by a fragile, flickering flame of hope. It was a huge risk, a leap of faith into a world I didn't understand. But the alternative was to fall. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Okay, Arthur. I accept." I could hear the smile in his voice when he replied. "Good. I'll have the contract sent over in the morning." The guest house was more than a guest house. It was a small, perfectly formed cottage, nestled in a corner of Arthur's sprawling, beautifully manicured property. It was made of stone and dark wood, with a slate roof and a small porch overlooking a grove of birch trees. It was clean and quiet and smelled of lemon polish and old books. It felt like a sanctuary. The library was in the main house, a breathtaking, two-story room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a rolling ladder, and a fireplace big enough to stand in. And it was, as he had promised, in a state of complete chaos. Books were stacked on every available surface, piled in corners, spilling out of boxes. It was a daunting task, but as I stood in the middle of it all, I felt a thrill of excitement. This was a puzzle I knew how to solve. This was a world where I was not an imposter, but an expert. The first few days were a blur of boxes and dust. I worked from morning until night, losing myself in the scent of old paper and leather, the quiet satisfaction of creating order out of chaos. Arthur was true to his word. He gave me my space. He was often gone before I started in the morning and returned late at night. We communicated mostly through notes left on the kitchen counter. He left me coffee and pastries in the morning. I left him a list of supplies I needed. It was a strange, distant kind of domesticity, but the tension between us was a constant, humming presence. I was so aware of him, even when he wasn't there. I was living in his space, wearing clothes washed in his laundry room, eating food from his refrigerator. The professional boundaries we had so carefully constructed felt thin, permeable. We would see each other in the evenings, sometimes. I would be walking back to the cottage, and he would be on the patio, reading a book, a glass of whiskey in his hand. We would exchange a few quiet words. He would ask about my progress. I would ask about his day. The conversations were polite, stilted, full of all the things we weren't saying. The air between us was thick with unspoken feelings, with the memory of his hand on mine in the gallery, with the intimacy of our late-night phone calls. The professional arrangement was becoming a beautiful, exquisite torture. I was falling for him, deeply and irrevocably. And I had no idea if he felt the same way. He was my employer. I was his employee. He held all the power. To misread the signs, to cross a line, would be to risk everything. My job, my home, my heart. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, I was in the library, high up on the rolling ladder, trying to reach a stack of books on the top shelf. I stretched, my fingers just brushing the spine of the topmost book. I stretched a little further, and in that moment, the ladder, which I hadn't secured properly, gave a sickening lurch. I cried out, my hands flailing for a hold as the ladder wobbled beneath me. I was going to fall. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. But the crash never came. Instead, I felt two strong hands grip the sides of the ladder, steadying it with a grunt of effort. I opened my eyes to find Arthur standing at the base of the ladder, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He had one hand firmly on each side of the ladder, his knuckles white. "Leo," he breathed, his voice rough with alarm. "Are you all right?" I was shaking, my heart hammering in my chest. "I think so," I managed to say. It slipped." "Come down," he said, his voice a command. Slowly, I did as he said, my legs trembling as I descended the rungs. When my feet were safely on the floor, he didn't let go of the ladder. He just stood there, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his eyes searching my face. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice low and intense. "I'm fine, Arthur." "Really, you're not," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "You're shaking." He finally let go of the ladder and reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a second before he cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was electric. All the carefully constructed walls, all the professional boundaries, dissolved in that single, gentle contact. "I can't do this anymore, Leo," he whispered, his voice ragged. My breath caught in my throat. "Do what?" "This," he said, his eyes searching mine. "This pretense. Pretending you are just my employee. Pretending I don't think about you every minute of the day. Pretending my heart didn't just stop when I saw that ladder slip. The confession hung in the air between us, as fragile and as beautiful as a spider's web. It was everything I had been hoping for, everything I had been terrified to imagine. I can't pretend either, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I haven't been able to pretend for a long time. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He took a step closer, his body almost flush with mine. He was so tall I had to tilt my head back to look at him. He smelled of that faint, clean cedar scent, of old books, and of home. Then tell me to stop, he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me to respect the boundaries. I'm looking up at him, at this incredible, kind, and steady man who saw me when I was invisible. This is it, the moment of truth. The present tense takes over, a sudden, sharp focus in the whirlwind of my emotions. I lift a hand, my fingers trembling slightly, and lay it against his chest. I can feel the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. It is the most solid, real thing I have ever felt. Don't stop, I breathe. And he doesn't. He lowers his head, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I don't. I can't. I meet him halfway, rising on my toes, and then his lips are on mine. The kiss is not what I expected. It is not a kiss of passion or of desperate, pent-up desire. It is a kiss of arrival. It is slow and gentle and searching. It is a question and an answer all at once. It is the taste of whiskey and relief and 1,000 unspoken conversations. His lips are soft, and his hand is warm on my jaw, holding me as if I am something precious. It is the most right and unforced thing I have ever known. It is a quiet foundation settling into place, the opening of a long-locked door. When he finally pulls back, he rests his forehead against mine. His eyes are closed, and he lets out a long, shuddering breath. Leo, he whispers, his voice full of a wonder that mirrors my own. I lace my fingers with his, our hands falling to rest between us. Arthur, I whisper back. We stand there for a long time, in the quiet of the chaotic library, our foreheads pressed together, our hands intertwined. The silence is no longer empty or sterile or reverent. It is full. It is full of a new, terrifying, and breathtaking beginning. The fall I had been so afraid of had happened, after all, but it wasn't from a ladder. It was into a pair of kind eyes, a steady hand, and a heart that felt, impossibly, like home. The morning after was disorienting. I woke up in my own bed in the guest cottage, the early sunlight filtering through the birch trees outside my window. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed it all, the wobbly ladder, the fear in Arthur's eyes, the impossible softness of his lips. But then I saw my shirt from the night before, draped over a chair, and the memory of the kiss, of the quiet confession in the library, came rushing back. It was real. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. What now? The power dynamic between us hadn't vanished with a kiss. If anything, it was more pronounced. I was still living on his property, still his employee. Last night had been a moment of pure emotion, but the morning light brought with it the harsh glare of reality. I pictured myself in his world, at his charity galas, on his private jet, among his powerful friends. I would be an appendage, a curiosity, the cleaner he'd taken in. The thought sent a chill of dread through me. I got dressed and walked over to the main house, my steps heavy with uncertainty. I found him in the kitchen, a vast, stainless steel expanse that could have serviced a restaurant. He was standing at the counter, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He looked normal, younger, more relaxed than I had ever seen him. He looked up as I entered, and his face broke into that slow, warm smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft. He slid one of the mugs across the marble countertop toward me. "I hope you like it black." "I do," I said, my voice quiet. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, the heat a small comfort. "Arthur, we need to talk." His smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of serious concern. "I agree." He gestured to the small breakfast nook by the window. "Sit." We sat across from each other, the morning light illuminating the worry on both our faces. He wasn't avoiding it. He was meeting it head-on. That, more than anything, gave me a flicker of hope. "I'm not going to pretend that last night didn't change things," he began, his gaze direct and steady. But I also won't pretend that the circumstances we find ourselves in aren't complicated. Complicated is one word for it, I said, a wry, humorless twist to my lips. I live here. I work for you. That doesn't just go away. No, it doesn't, he agreed. And I have been thinking about that all night. Your independence is important, Leo. Your agency is paramount. The last thing I ever want is for you to feel trapped or obligated. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. So, here's what I propose. First, we terminate your employment contract. Today, I stared at him, my heart sinking. What? Let me finish, he said gently. The library project is yours. You will finish it, but not as my employee. As a consultant, my foundation will issue you a grant, the full amount we agreed upon for the project, paid up front. It will be more than enough for you to secure a new apartment and have a cushion to live on while you decide what you want to do next. The guest house is yours, rent-free, for the next 3 months, no matter what you decide. Consider it a signing bonus. I was stunned. He was methodically, practically, dismantling the power he held over me. He was giving me my freedom back. He was ensuring that if I chose to be with him, it would be a choice, not a necessity. This way, he continued, we are no longer employer and employee. We are two men, equals. And if you choose to be with me, it will be because you want to be, not because you feel you have to. And if you choose not to be, you will have the resources and the space to walk away. No strings attached. Tears pricked my eyes. The sheer, breathtaking decency of the gesture overwhelmed me. He had seen my deepest fear, the fear of dependency, of being a kept man, and he had addressed it with respect and care. He wasn't just saying he wanted us to be equals. He was taking concrete steps to make it so. Arthur, I started, my voice thick. The choice is yours, Leo, he said again, his voice firm. Always, I reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers curled around mine, a familiar, comforting warmth. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice finally steady. Unless it's with you. A few weeks later, we faced our first small test. Arthur had a small, informal dinner party at the house for a few close friends and business associates. He had asked me if I wanted to join them, making it clear that it was fine if I said no. But I knew this was a hurdle we had to cross. I couldn't hide in the guest house forever. I was nervous, my palms sweating as I walked into the living room. The guests were exactly as I had imagined, elegant, confident, radiating wealth and success. They looked at me with polite curiosity as Arthur introduced me. He didn't say my partner or my boyfriend, he just said, "This is Leo," his hand resting warmly on the small of my back. He let me be myself. One of the guests, a sharp-faced man named Julian who ran an investment fund, looked me up and down with a barely concealed smirk. "Leo," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And what is it that you do?" The question was a clear challenge, a test of my place in this world. The old me would have mumbled something about cleaning or being between jobs, but standing there, with the steady weight of Arthur's hand on my back, I felt a surge of confidence. I met his gaze directly. "I'm a consulting archivist," I said, my voice clear and even. "I'm currently managing the restoration and cataloging of a private library collection." Julian's smirk faltered. He clearly hadn't expected such a specific, professional answer. He mumbled something about it being interesting and quickly turned away. Later that evening, as I was helping Arthur clear some glasses from the patio, he turned to me, a proud, warm smile on his face. "A consulting archivist," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I like the sound of that. It's true," I said with a shrug, though I couldn't suppress a small smile of my own. "That is what I do." "I know," he said softly. He leaned in and kissed me, a brief, gentle kiss right there on the patio, with the lights of the city twinkling below us. "And you are very, very good at it." In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. The outside world, with its judgments and its assumptions, would always be there. But in here, between us, we were building something strong, something based on mutual respect and a quiet, steady love. We were two men from different worlds, but we were learning to speak the same language. The library project took another 2 months to complete. They were 2 of the happiest months of my life. I worked during the day, surrounded by the quiet company of books, my mind engaged, my old passions rekindled. In the evenings, Arthur and I would have dinner together. We talked for hours, learning the rhythms of each other's lives, the stories of our pasts. We would sit by the fire, reading in comfortable silence, or walk through the gardens, his hand in mine. It was a quiet, gentle courtship. There were no grand romantic gestures, no lavish gifts. The intimacy we built was in the small things. The way he always made me coffee in the morning. The way I learned to straighten his tie before he left for work. The way we could communicate a whole conversation with just a look. He showed me his vulnerabilities, the immense pressure and loneliness that came with his position. And I showed him mine, the deep-seated insecurities and the scars of my past struggles. We were not a billionaire and his project. We were just Arthur and Leo. When the library was finished, it was magnificent. Every book was cleaned, repaired, and cataloged. The shelves were organized. The lighting was perfect. It was a space of order and beauty, a testament to months of hard work. I felt a profound sense of pride in what I had accomplished. I had taken chaos and created a sanctuary. The day I finished, Arthur came to see it. He walked into the room and just stood there, speechless. He ran his hand along a row of leather-bound spines, his expression one of awe. "Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's perfect. You're a magician. I'm a consulting archivist." I reminded him with a smile. "You are so much more than that," he said, turning to face me. He took both of my hands in his. "This project is finished. Your grant is paid. The guest house is yours for another month. You are a free man, Leo. You can go anywhere, do anything." He held my gaze, his own eyes full of a quiet, anxious hope. He was giving me one last chance to walk away, to prove that everything we had built was a choice. I squeezed his hands. "I know," I said softly, "but I have a proposition for you." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Oh, the main house is very large," I began, my tone mimicking the calm, measured way he had spoken to me on the phone all those months ago. "And your bedroom is on the opposite side of the house from your office. It seems inefficient. I, on the other hand, have a very short commute from the guest house, but I find the accommodations a little lonely." A slow smile spread across his face as he realized what I was doing. "I propose," I continued, my voice gaining confidence, "a merger. We could consolidate our living arrangements into a single, more efficient location. My terms are simple. Equal shelf space in the bathroom, and I get to choose the coffee." He let out a laugh, a deep, happy sound that filled the beautiful, orderly room. He pulled me into his arms, wrapping them around me in a fierce, possessive hug. "Accepted," he murmured into my hair. "The terms are more than acceptable." I buried my face in his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. I was home. This morning, I woke up not in the guest house, but in Arthur's bed, the morning light streaming through the massive bedroom windows. His arm was draped possessively over my waist, his breathing a slow, steady rhythm against my back. For a few moments, I just lay there, listening to the sound of his heartbeat, feeling the solid warmth of his body next to mine. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and pulled on one of his cashmere sweaters. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, the cool marble floor a familiar feeling under my feet. I started the coffee, the rich, dark aroma filling the quiet house. Our house. As the coffee brewed, I walked over to the large window that overlooked the city. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Down below, the city was waking up, the first stirrings of traffic a distant murmur. It was a world away from the sterile silence of the dental clinic, a world away from the dingy hallway of my old apartment building. I thought about the man I was a year ago, lonely, broke, invisible, a ghost moving through the quiet hours. I thought about the fear, the shame, the hopelessness. It all felt like a lifetime ago. A pair of strong arms wrapped around me from behind, and Arthur's chin came to rest on my shoulder. He was still warm from sleep. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice husky. I leaned back against his chest, my hand covering his where they were clasped over my stomach. "Everything," I said softly. "How everything has changed." He was quiet for a moment, his cheek resting against my hair. "Has it been a good change?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. I turned in his arms to face him, my hands coming up to cup his jaw. The faint stubble there was familiar, comforting. I looked into his eyes, those kind, steady eyes that had seen me from the very beginning. "It's been the best change," I said. "You didn't save me, Arthur. You just reminded me who I was. You gave me the space and the safety to save myself." He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss full of morning coffee and quiet contentment. It was a kiss that spoke of shared futures and comfortable silences, of partnership and of peace. When he pulled away, he smiled, that slow, beautiful smile that still made my heart skip a beat. "Well," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the consulting archivist is a remarkable man." It was a wise investment. I laughed, a real, happy laugh that echoed in the sun-filled kitchen. "Come on," I said, taking his hand and pulling him toward the coffee maker. "Your wise investment is going to be late for work," as I poured our coffee into our mugs. His, a plain white one. Mine, a chipped one I'd brought from my old apartment that he insisted on using. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The difference in our ages, in our bank accounts, it was all still there. It was a part of our story, but it was no longer the headline. It was just context. The real story was us. It was about kindness and respect. It was about two lonely men who found each other in the dark and walked out into the sunlight, together. He had asked me to smile for him once, a plea from one tired soul to another. I hadn't realized then that he was giving me a reason to smile for the rest of my life. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.